Hey, Zach.
Hey,
All right. So, how are you doing?
pretty good. You?
Not bad. Thanks. Ooh. Okay. Hmm. Trying to get the situation by screen sharing worked out here. There we go. Okay. All right. Well, we are on to a new topic, new set of topics today. And these are some classics. Um, First, though, I want to just go over the description of the final project for this course. Um, the description is posted on eCollege, but I want to make sure that everyone hears it. So I'm going to go over it a little bit in class. Now, I'd like it if everyone was here, though. So I guess I would just sort of as a final kind of comment on the philosophy of mind section, one of the things that I think is a kind of take-home message from the theories that we looked at, the ideas that we talked about, is that it's pretty hard to defend materialism about the mind. As much as it's I think, natural thing for people to think, especially those who go to college and get educated in the sciences, it's kind of a natural thing to believe that there's nothing really too deeply mysterious about the world, and that science pretty much has a grasp on everything, and that there's questions that are open, but that there's really no, I don't know, in principle, problem with the idea that neuroscience will reveal everything that we want to know about the mind. But in fact, it's not so clear, and you can defend materialism, but it's harder than I think a lot of people realize. And I think that's good. That's a good thing to know, to be aware of. So,
I was curious for my final project, could I do like the ethics of science and scientific research and examination and the philosophy behind that?
oh, that's an interesting topic. Yeah. Is there a particular issue that you kind of have in mind that got you thinking about this?
Well, I've always been interested in the Holocaust, how the Nazis experimented on so many people, and how terrible it was. And I think people oftentimes think science is a good thing because it gives us so many things, but there's just a line somewhere, and we just have to decide where it was. And it also ties into interesting things like cloning and
right.
embryonic stem cell research and all that. So that's why I was kind of interested in it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, definitely you can write about these things. One thing that I'll push you to do is, oh, here comes.
Oh wait, our cap is on.
Okay.
Sorry, the guy isn't like setting this up for us anymore, so.
And now it's super zoomed in.
Okay.
Sorry. Usually the guy like sets it up for us, but for some reason he hasn't been doing it. So
stop setting it up.
Yeah, so now we have to figure out how to do it. So.
Maybe he thought it was only a 1 semester course.
Oh, he probably thought that. Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll tell him.
I don't know. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, Zach was just asking about a topic for his final project, and I was explaining why that is it's a good project, it's a good topic. He wants to do something on ethics and science, and the thing that I was just saying, hold on, let me get so I can see you guys both. There we go. Is that so, Zach? One of the things I'll probably push you is to not make it a completely applied paper. So I'll probably push you to think about what you think the principles, the ethical principles are behind different views on whether certain kinds of scientific research are morally permissible. And I want you to talk a little bit about which ethical theory, which theory of what makes an action morally correct or morally permissible you think is right, and then you can show how those apply to those different cases. That's what I'd want you to do. So if that sounds okay to you, then I think you've got a pretty good idea for a final project. Okay. Yeah. So for Alexandra and Jacob, you guys don't have to have a topic in mind yet, but it's good to start thinking about it because today is the day that I'm sort of officially assigning the final project. And I wanted to just, and good, I see your hands, that's good. And I want to just bring up the actual description of the assignment onto the shared screen. Here we go. Now, I know this is dreadful to have to try to read.
Yeah,
that's
not going to happen.
You don't have to read it. I'll kind of walk you through this. If you haven't looked at this already on eCollege, you can see there's links here. There's one called Research Project. Just click on that and this will appear. So please look at that soon because 2 weeks from today is when the proposal is due. And the proposal is the first step in the project. Okay. The proposal itself is not graded. Nothing is graded except the final draft, which is due pretty close to the end of the year. But you have to do every other part of the final project in order to get a grade on the final paper. Okay? So you got to do each step, even though the only thing that's really graded is the final result. Okay. So the proposal as a whole, by the way, the research project is 35% of your grade for the semester. It's a big deal. But that's because I think this should reflect your best effort in this class. This should be the thing that you put the most work into. It should be the most polished, it should be the best representation of your sort of philosophical skills that you'll produce in this class. So anyway, the proposal, you pick a topic and I need to approve it. So you can submit your proposal at any time, but get it to me by Monday, February 23rd, end of the day. So midnight, Monday night, your time. There's not going to be a Dropbox thing for this. You can just send me an email. You can either include your proposal in the body of the email or type it up in Word and attach it. Okay, so send it to me as an email. I'm only looking for 1 or 2 paragraphs here. I want to see that you're thinking about what you might want to work on, what you're interested in. And if you have some idea about what your view might be, that's fine, but you don't have to. So Zach just gave me some topics that he was interested in. He might have a view on those things now. He might not. That's okay. And hopefully what I will be able to do is give you some feedback, like, okay, you might want to look at this. You might want to start reading this paper by this philosopher or something. I'll try to give you some kind of things to look into to help you start thinking, help deepen your knowledge in the area that you're interested in. It can be on anything from the entire year. It can be on any topic in philosophy that we talk about across the entire year. It just needs to be grounded in what we are doing. It doesn't have to be a specific thing that we actually talk about. So, for instance, Zach's issue about the morality of certain kinds of scientific research. That's not a topic we're going to read a paper on, but it is grounded in a topic that we are talking about, namely moral philosophy. So, okay. Yes, Alexandra.
Two things. So, like the topic on our philosophy course, can it be like a more like contemporary type of topic as well? Like how his was like something about research nowadays, so he might bring in stuff about current research. So you can do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think this is a topic I would choose, but like let's say abortion or something like that, which is like a very like not something we've definitely discussed, but you could do that.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say to that project, I see the same thing I was to Zach, namely, what you're really going to be looking at are different theories of what makes an act right or wrong. And then you would try to decide which of those you think is correct. And then you can apply it to the abortion debate or any other debate that you're interested in. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other question I had was I would think I was interested in the idea of like computer philosophy, mind and computer, but if you're not sure where you want to take that, do you have any suggestions? Like, I don't know exactly what I would do with that if I continued with it.
Right. So right. That's good. If you wrote a proposal like that to me, expressing your interest in that topic, I'd be able to give you definitely some different particular areas to look at within that general field. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Jacob.
Yeah, so because I was for some reason under the impression that when we gave you our proposal, we had to be a little bit more narrow, but it sounds like it just has to be a broad topic that we're interested in.
Yeah, so narrower the better. It's better to, if you have something narrowed down, that's great. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be super narrow.
Okay.
Right. So Alexandra, if you were interested in computers and the mind, you might want to think about, well, what is it in particular that has you interested in that, and tell me about that. So you can give me a broad topic, but tell me a little bit about why you're interested in that, or what it is that kind of got you thinking about that topic, because that'll help me give you some further suggestions. Okay. Yeah, Zach.
I don't think I see it on the page that you have up specifically, but is there a page limit or page minimum number of pages that this project has to be? I'd assume there is. I was just curious what that minimum is.
Yeah, so I forget actually what I say. Yeah, so you should be looking for 12 to 15 pages.
And can it go over this page limit a little bit if we want to add some more things? Okay.
Yeah, so for this, the upper limit is there just to give you a range of what you should be shooting for, but it's not a hard limit in the sense that this is something that can be as long as you want it to be within some reason. But yeah, you don't have to. If you have more to say, that's fine. So actually what I do give you a minimum length in the sense that it's got to be 3,500 words minimum. Just a little bit more about this project so you have it kind of in your mind what you're up against, what you're going to need to do here. There's also an in-class lecture, right? So once you've got your topic and you've done some work on it, enough so that you kind of know, you feel pretty comfortable with what the topic is, and you have some idea what you might want to say on the topic. You'll introduce your topic to us and tell us what you think on it, because that's about 10 to 15 minutes that you'll talk about your idea, and then we're gonna do like question and answer, and maybe if you have a position, maybe we'll even raise some objections. And when I say we, I really mean you guys. I won't get too involved in this, but I think it's good for you to hear what your classmates think, and you might get some ideas for like, okay, so maybe I need to rework this idea a little bit, or I'm definitely going to have to work on my defense of this position, or I'm definitely going to have to work on clarifying what I mean when I say X, that kind of stuff. So, and plus it's fun for us to get to hear what other people are working on. So that can be done at any time. Again, you want to wait until you're far along enough that you really have something to say, but otherwise, and it shouldn't be too close to the deadline, right? So, I'd aim for late March, April sometime. Sort of, that's around the time you should probably be far enough along that you could do this. And now remember, this is in addition to a presentation that I'm asking you guys to do on one of the readings that's assigned, just like last semester. So remember that as well. What else? The first draft of the paper is due Sunday, April 5th. And I'm not calling this a rough draft because the first draft really is your first attempt at this project. And I'm going to give you quite a bit of feedback, I hope, on that, which you'll take into account and in your revision in the final draft, which is due on Sunday, May 3rd. Okay. And by the way, there's no other writing assignments for the class. This is it now. This is what you're working on. And spring break's coming up, and that's long. In this course, it's long. There's 3 weeks where we don't have any class meetings. And during that time, you should be working on that draft, that first draft, okay? So, and so I really am going to expect that you make pretty good progress during that time. That's the good news is that there's no class. The bad news is that you're supposed to be doing work during that time. So, okay. So, other questions about the final project? Okay. Okay, good. Well, if you have other questions, definitely let me know. Let's see if there's anything else that I want to mention. Well, I'll come back and say a little more about the first draft and even the final draft before we leave for the spring break, so that you have that in your mind as you go off on this break and start working on this. Okay. Now, I get back my Adobe Connect screen. Let's see. All right, well, no, my computer seems to want to hang up on this. Okay. I'll just do it this way. There we go. One thing I was saying to Zach as you guys were coming in that I thought just sort of a take-home point from the section on philosophy of mind, because we're moving on to a new unit now, and this is a big one. But one of the take-home message, one of the things I want you guys to kind of have learned, so to speak, from our discussion of theories of mind is that it's surprisingly difficult to be a materialist about the mind. As you learn science, as you go to college and hear about all these cool ideas and cool developments in science, I think it's natural for a lot of people to think that there's not really anything that maybe neuroscience won't be able to tell us about the mind. And in fact, that's not so clear. And I think it's important, and I think it's interesting to know that there are some difficulties about the mind, and it's not clear how we can give an account of the mind the way we give an account of so many other natural phenomena. The mind really is a difficult topic, and I think a lot of scientists are understanding this now as well. It's not just a sort of thing that a philosopher will say anymore. So anyway, on now to epistemology. Now, this is one of these words that you probably have never heard before if you haven't dealt with philosophy, and its meaning probably is not clear to you. But what it means is the theory of knowledge, the philosophical study of knowledge. And epistemology really includes a number of different kinds of questions. Skip that. So there are sort of four central issues within the theory of knowledge, within epistemology. Questions about the nature of knowledge, right? What is knowledge? What do we mean when we say that somebody knows something? And that's a question about the nature of knowledge. The sources of knowledge. Where does knowledge come from? How do we get it? There are two different views on that. We'll get to in a second. Questions about the scope and limits of knowledge. I think these are the questions that tend to be the most interesting. The question about, is knowledge possible? Can we know anything? And even if we can know some things, how much do we know? And in particular, to what extent do we really know as much as we ordinarily think we know? Right? We always talk about what we know. I know how to tie my shoes. I know my phone number. I know your names. I know how to get to the store. I know what planet in the solar system is the largest, stuff like that. But do I really know these things? And if so, how? Okay. Finally, there's this question, and this is sort of in the background of a lot of these other ones, about the structure of knowledge. And this has to do with the way in which our pieces of knowledge, assuming we have any, are related to one another. Some people suggest that knowledge is kind of like a pyramid, in that there's foundational knowledge upon which we build all the rest of our knowledge. But another group of thinkers suggests that knowledge is more like a web or like a raft, and that you've got all these bits of knowledge that all kind of support each other. They work together. There aren't any particular pieces that are the foundation upon which all the rest is built. There are different local foundations maybe, but you can shift from one to the other. So those are the kind of central questions. A little more about these. I'm going to come back actually to that. So I mentioned this question about how do we get knowledge? Where does knowledge come from? And there have been two main theories in the history of thought. One is called empiricism. This is probably a familiar idea to some of you, empiricism. It's the view that all of our knowledge ultimately comes from experience and can only come from experience. There's simply nothing else to appeal to in looking for knowledge. This idea, you might think back, actually the distinction I'm drawing now, you might think back to our first discussion of arguments about the existence of God and the different ways in which philosophers tried to show that God exists, right? Some appealed to facts that we know on the basis of experience. That's a kind of empiricist approach. Others try to appeal only to what we can, as it were, realize by thinking, okay? Rationalism is the view, rationalism is the view that there are some substantive facts about the world that we can know just by thinking. No, we don't need to appeal to experience at all. We can know them just by thinking. Now, that's a pretty interesting claim. Notice it's not the claim that all knowledge is like this. So empiricism is a claim about all knowledge. Rationalism is just the denial, in a sense, of empiricism, saying, no, not all knowledge comes from experience. There's some that comes from reason, thought alone. But more on those views over the next few weeks. The scope and limits of knowledge. So this interesting question, is it even possible to have knowledge, right? Are all our beliefs about what we know mistaken? Some people think it's not possible to have knowledge. And these people are radical global skeptics, right? They're skeptical of the view that we can ever know anything. You probably are familiar with the idea of being skeptical or being a skeptic. It doesn't always mean this, but it's a kind of attitude towards knowledge claims. People who think that knowledge is possible, we'll call epistemological optimists. They're optimistic about our claim to ever know anything. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
So do radical global skeptics, do they automatically think that we don't know anything, or do they just think that we can't be sure that we know anything?
Okay, so your question actually has an interesting distinction within it about knowing something versus being sure that you know something. Okay, as some people would put it, it's a distinction between knowing something and knowing that you know that thing. And it's interesting that many people seem to have held that if you know something, you know that you know it. Notice that there's an immediate regress there, right? Because if you think that knowing something entails knowing that you know it, then not only do you know that you know it, you know that you know that you know it. Now, maybe that leads you to think, well, then maybe we shouldn't think that just because you know something, you know that you know it. But so, to finally answer Zach's question, some skeptics are not merely saying that we're not sure that we cannot be sure that we have knowledge. They're actually arguing that you cannot have knowledge. You cannot meet the conditions under which it is true to say so-and-so has knowledge. Okay. But we'll look at that view. We'll look at arguments for that view later. And look, I think it's going to turn out that really radical view is very hard to sustain. Okay, so a lot of skeptics will come back and say, yeah, okay, fine. It's possible that we know things, but do we have any reason to believe we ever do know something? It's possible, but do we actually know things? Again, optimists say yes. Skeptics of a slightly less radical sort say no. But then you might say, okay, sure, but fine. I grant that we sometimes know things. Do we really? And this is a question I got alluded to earlier. Do we know as much as we ordinarily think that we know? How much does our actual knowledge sort of match up with our kind of pre-theoretical ideas about what we know? And this is where this is where it gets more difficult to settle things. So just as a couple of versions of more local skepticisms. So there's something called external world skepticism. This is a view that knowledge is confined to the contents of your own mind, right? You can't really know anything except what is present to the mind. Sam's not here today, but I think many of the things Sam has said throughout the year suggest to me a kind of external world skepticism on his part. So we'll have to see what he thinks of that. And then there's local skepticisms like skepticism about knowledge in science, or skepticism about knowledge of moral truths in particular. those are quite common kinds of local skepticism. Okay, but again, this is just a little précis of what we're going to be getting into. I already talked about this a little bit. So foundationalism, this is views about how knowledge is structured, right? The foundationalist thinks it's like a pyramid. There are fundamental beliefs that we ultimately appeal to in justifying everything else that we know. Whereas the coherentist thinks that knowledge hangs together in a more complicated way. There's no foundation. We can justify a certain belief by appeal to other beliefs, but it's not true that every belief ultimately leads to the same set of foundational beliefs. So knowledge is like a raft or a web, according to the coherentist. Okay, so the question that we're starting with is this view about the nature of knowledge, about what knowledge is. Okay, and we'll return to this idea as we go along. But the question is, what is it that we mean when we say of a person that they know that Jupiter is the largest planet, or something like that? And before we get to the famous answer to this question, it's important to draw a couple of distinctions. And this should sound a little familiar to you from our discussion of Frank Jackson's argument. So when philosophers give theories of knowledge, they're interested in a particular kind of knowledge. So even in the examples I gave of what I know, I said I know how to blank several times. So I know how to tie my shoe. I know how to ride a bicycle. This is knowledge. This is called ability knowledge or know-how. This is not what philosophers, that's not what epistemologists are interested in. They're not trying to give an account of the conditions under which it's true to say of a person that they have some ability or they know how to do something. They're also not particularly interested in what's called acquaintance, right? Knowing another person, okay? Knowing your relatives, knowing of someone. That's also not really the topic. The topic is what gets called propositional knowledge, knowledge of facts, knowledge that something is the case. Usually that clause, when you say, I know that such and such is true, it's the occurrence of the that clause that gives away propositional knowledge. That shows that you're talking about propositional knowledge. Okay, so the standard form of this kind of attribution of knowledge that we'll see in epistemology is the phrase S, referring to some person, some subject, some potential knower. S knows that P. So P here just stands for a proposition, a complete declarative sentence. So replace P with any complete declarative sentence, and you get a knowledge attribution of the sort that we're interested in epistemology, in the study of knowledge. Okay? So S knows that 2 + 2 = 4. S knows that it will rain tomorrow in California, that kind of stuff. Okay, so now we can talk about the theory that most philosophers have accepted, it seems, since the dawn of written philosophy in the Western world. And so now our question: under what conditions does S know that P? Does someone know that something is the case? And the standard procedure here is to try to specify the necessary and jointly sufficient conditions for someone's knowing that something is true. And you use if and only if to show that you're trying to specify the sufficient and necessary conditions, right? The conditions that a person must meet in order to know something, and the conditions that, when taken together, are sufficient for someone's knowing something, right? We've been using this if and only if throughout the semester, or the year actually, but was that a question, Hand, or that was just, yeah? Okay. So the the theory, well, let's see, how do we want to do this? Now, you guys have read the paper, so you might be clued into this already, but do you have a sense of what you might have said? If I were to ask you, what does it mean to say that someone knows a fact, right? Under what conditions does someone know that, say, the sky is blue? Would you even know where to begin with that kind of question? Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
I probably would have said they believe in something and that something is true. Then, in that case, they know that's something.
Right. Okay, thank you. That would have been a good start. Yeah, Jacob?
Or also that the person is aware that something, or yeah, and that goes along with like believes, and then they're aware of this and they believe that to be true.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point that we generally, I think the belief condition, so incidentally, the view that Zach just suggested would be called the true belief theory of knowledge, the TB theory. And it combines two claims, the belief condition, namely that the person must believe the thing in question, right? So if you don't believe that the sky is blue, you can't know that the sky is blue. If you don't believe that Jupiter is the largest planet, you can't know that Jupiter is the largest planet. Now, I think that the belief condition is often taken to include this kind of awareness condition that, Jacob, that you mentioned. And it's a good point that, look, there's a certain number of facts that are kind of within our, I don't know, in our mental world, in the sense of there are things that we have thought of or have heard about, things that we're in some very broad sense aware of, right? Things that you never have heard of, things that you never even thought about, can't be things that you know because you're not aware of them in the right sense. And the belief condition is supposed to account for this. And in fact, the belief condition is somewhat more exclusive, because there are a lot of things that you might be aware of that you don't believe, right? You're all aware of certain political opinions, perhaps, that you don't accept. You're probably aware of religious views that you don't accept. So the idea of believing something is the idea of accepting it, to take it to be the case. So yeah, go ahead, Jacob.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I don't know, like with like a religion, like I'm aware of religion and I believe it to exist, even though I don't believe in it. I think that that's a different type of belief, isn't it?
Yeah, so there you would want to distinguish the two propositions that are believed. Okay, so Jacob believes that there are religious systems, rather than Jacob believes that the Judeo-Christian God exists, or something like that. Right? So you distinguish the beliefs by the proposition.
Okay.
And one thing to point out here, belief, sometimes when people talk about what they believe, what they mean is what they believe on the basis of faith. But in this context, belief carries no such connotations, right? So you guys believe that you're sitting at desks right now. You accept the proposition, I am sitting at a desk. Anything that you take to be true is something you believe, right? You believe there are birds in the world. You believe that you're taking an MSON class, right? These are things that you believe, you accept, okay? Now, second condition, is that the belief must be true. You can't know. You can believe something that's false, right? A lot of people have false beliefs. It's pretty likely that each of us has some false beliefs. You might have believed that the Seahawks are going to win the Super Bowl there at the end, but you didn't know it, even though you might have felt it very strongly. I was sure that they were going to score a touchdown there at the end and win that game, but they didn't. I didn't know it because it wasn't true. Now, future propositions are kind of tricky, so we shouldn't rely only on that. But look, you might have beliefs about what city is the largest in the world, and that could turn out to be false. If it's false, you don't know it, even if you feel very sure of yourself. Go ahead, Jacob.
I was going to say, like, in science, sometimes people say, or I don't know, like 100 years ago, people might have said, we know that in chemistry this happens, but then, and they believed that it happened, and they thought that it must be true, and they thought that they knew it, but then 100 years later it was disproved,
right?
Or something like that. Well, do they still know it? What if no one can disprove it, even though it may actually be not true? How does that affect knowing? Because they might feel that they know it.
I'm sure they do feel that they know it, but yeah. Zach, did you want to respond?
Well, I was going to say that when you talk about something like that, it gets into the idea of absolute truth. And if you think that laws of nature and that chemical facts, as you point them out, are absolute truths, which I think they would be considered absolute truths if they are true, then you don't have to know that there's a law of chemistry exists for that law of chemistry to exist. And conversely, if you think that something is true, be it a law of chemistry, that doesn't mean the law of chemistry is true. It doesn't mean you know a law of chemistry, but it means you believe in a law of chemistry. And even if people believe that law is true, then that doesn't mean it is true. It's not. You don't have true knowledge of it. You just have what you think it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a good. I think that's a good way to explain those sorts of cases. There's a difference between believing something and it's being the case, and in order to have knowledge, what you believe has to match up with what is in the right way. And you could be very confident, you think you know something, and yet it could turn out that you didn't. Yeah, Alexandra.
Maybe you can never really know if something is true though. Like in science, there's always something that's changing. Like religion, you never really will know if you're true. Do you have
so here, Alexandra is expressing a local skepticism.
Oh, is that okay? Yep. I was like,
yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay. All right, I'm a skeptic. Yeah, so you've just made a claim about knowledge, namely that we can never have knowledge in certain domains. You mentioned religion and science as examples. So we'll have to see whether we, in the end, think that's right. But there you go. You've got a position in epistemology there. Good. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
I would actually respond that when you say that we can never know if something is scientifically true and that our ideas are always changing, I don't think that's completely correct because, yes, our ideas about science are changing, but there are normally there are fewer and fewer degrees of change, shall we say, because let's take the idea of the shape of the Earth. Originally, people thought it was flat. Then they thought it was a perfect sphere. And then they changed that and they thought it was a slightly oblong sphere. And now they're saying that it is very, very slightly pear-shaped, where it's like there's a 0.0001 degree curve in the Earth at a specific place. So yes, and maybe in 100 years they will modify that again, so it's in another weird shape I can't describe. But technically that's changing, but it's changing less and less as time goes on. And you can theorize that eventually we will get the exact shape of the Earth, and a similar theory can be done for other points of scientific inquiry.
Hey, we're having our first debate in epistemology. Okay. Jacob, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm more inclined to agree with Alexandra on this. That even I mean, especially for science and religion, our knowledge comes from. Okay, wait.
Be precise with our words here.
I know.
Are we talking beliefs? Are we talking?
No, because we will never truly know if the truth condition is correct or not. We can believe that it's true, but I know, because the words are starting to trip me up. But
and let me just point out what you've just done, though. What's happening here is the worry is whether we know the truth condition is satisfied.
Yes.
The TB theory doesn't say that you have to believe it. Yeah. So let's go with the shape of the Earth as our. So our proposition is that the Earth is what? A perfect sphere? What? Let's use that. The TB theory of knowing that the Earth is a perfect sphere says that you must believe it to be a perfect sphere and that it must be a perfect sphere. It doesn't say that you have to know that it is a perfect sphere. That would make it circular. Right? That would make the theory. Yeah.
But I just don't like that, because you can never be sure if it's a sphere or not. So how do you even know if you know it if you don't know if it's spherical?
Okay, so now you're starting to feel the pull of the view that in order to know something, you have to know that you know it.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, part of what this is about here is a certain problem with the true belief theory. Did you guys get what the problem? So the true belief theory is not a good theory of knowledge. And now I don't know if you saw the problem of it from, I think it was in the introduction to the section on epistemology that mentioned a problem with the true belief theory. It was very briefly stated, so you easily could have missed it. But yeah, Zach, you want to try?
It wasn't that it has to be justified or that you might be justified in believing. Was it that you might be justified in believing something that's wrong?
So it's related to that. It's that you can have a belief that turns out to be true, but for kind of crazy reasons. Like it's sort of an accident that you just happen to have a true belief. So, most people think that suppose that you mistakenly thought that what's a good example? Now, let me use the example of an alien who is in a solar system very similar to ours. And that alien mistakenly thinks that Jupiter is the largest planet in its home solar system. Okay. Now suppose that unbeknownst to that alien, the alien gets transmitted to Earth. Wakes up, this alien looks like a human, walks around talking about how Jupiter is the largest planet in the solar system. Now it turns out that alien is saying something true, given that it's here on Earth and Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system. But it's kind of an accident. It doesn't really have anything to do with the alien's right to the belief that Jupiter is the largest planet. It's just that by a kind of weird accident, the alien finds himself in a condition in which what he's saying is true. Okay. That's a weird example. So how about this one? Suppose that I give you a pill. You don't have any opinion about what city is the largest um, uh, in the world, and a side effect of this pill, it does something to your brain, and it just causes you to believe truly that such and such is the largest city, whichever is the largest right now. I'm actually not sure about this myself.
Tokyo.
I don't know if it's Mexico City or Tokyo or what's the largest city in the world now. But suppose it just causes you to believe that thing, and it happens to be true. Well, most people want to say that you don't know that that city is the largest city, even though you have that belief and it happens to be true. And the reason is that you have it because of this weird, you have it for a reason that has nothing to do with the fact that it is the largest city. Let's use New York City in the United States, so I can use a specific example. The fact that you believe that New York City is the largest in the United States has nothing to do with anything you've learned, any experiences you've had. It's just something that you happen to believe now that you didn't believe before. And it's not as if the person who designed this pill made it so that it would give you this belief. It just randomly causes you to believe it. If you like, everyone who takes it acquires a belief about what the largest city is, and it's random which city that is. You just happen to be the one in which it causes the belief that New York City is the largest in the United States. That's not knowledge. Does that sound, I'm trying to use an example where it seems plausible that it's not knowledge, even though it's a true belief. Yeah, Alexandra.
Sorry, I didn't know if we had time for another question, but I was wondering, like, what if, like, something has to be true? Like, something is true, but you just don't believe in it?
So something is true, but you don't believe it. So let's take the existence of God. Let's suppose that God exists. And so atheists don't believe that. Atheists believe God does not exist. They do not know that God does not exist.
Oh, so you can't have knowledge even if something, like, let's say like H2O, water is H2O, like there's like no doubt, but like someone doesn't believe that is, but he like still knows that fact. So then he knows that is true, but he doesn't believe in it. Does that still count as having knowledge?
Oh, no, because I'm not quite sure how you describe a person who knows something if they don't believe it.
I guess like that's
the fact that something, I see what you're saying. Could the fact that something must be true, as it were, make someone know it? I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
The reason that can't work is that if that were true, if things that were necessarily true automatically counted as knowledge, then all kinds of animals have knowledge of those things.
I see.
But that sounds wrong because they can't form the belief.
I see.
So many people have thought you have to add the justification condition. And this gets to the whole issue about whether we know whether P is true, right? The question is, we need to be justified in believing that it's true. Okay, so, that's the belief pill example that I just mentioned. So this is the JTB theory, probably the longest lived theory in the history of philosophy. You can find it in the writings of Plato, 300 years BC. And the view is that a person knows something just in case, if and only if, they believe it, it's true, and they're justified in believing it. Okay, so now I think we can go back to the examples about science and religion, and I think what we can understand Jacob and Alexandra expressing skepticism about is the claim that we're ever really justified in believing some scientific claim, right? Maybe the claim about the shape of the Earth. I think you guys are questioning whether, sure, people believe it. Maybe it's true. but they don't have the right kind of justification for believing it. The fact that they believe it isn't important enough to make it something that they know. Yeah, Jacob.
So back to like the early part of the year and the existence of God. And what if you believed in the existence of God because of like Pascal's wager? So you believe that God exists. We're not sure whether God exists or not. But then, does that fit the bill for justifying that you believe in God?
Good question. Do you want to respond to this, Zach?
Yes, I think we established when we were talking about Pascal's wager that Pascal's wager isn't really a good argument for actually believing in God. It's an argument for why you should believe in God. And so when you're saying someone doesn't ever believe in God because of Pascal's wager, or I think it's very difficult to believe in God just because of Pascal's wager, because you can say you believe in God and you can go to services for various churches in order to worship God, but if you don't believe in God, Pascal's wager won't fix that. You'll still have a seed of doubt inside of you that says, I don't know if God exists. You'll just be acting as if God exists because of Pascal's wager.
Okay. Right.
So, I mean, the one thing that is pretty clear about Pascal's wager is that and I think I put it this way at the time, although you might not have quite caught what was going on. There's a difference between the attempt to justify a belief by providing evidence in its favor versus giving reasons why holding a belief is in one's best interest or prudent, right?
Okay.
Pascal's wager is a prudential argument for belief in God. It isn't an attempt to justify belief in God, as in provide evidence for its truth.
I didn't know if that would be termed in justification, not.
Yeah, so most people won't think of that as a form of justification. Okay. But trying to say what exactly justification is difficult.
Yeah.
It has to do with giving evidence, but and this is a central area of study in contemporary epistemology, partly because of this guy, Edmund Gettier. In 1963, he wrote this tiny little paper that I assigned you guys to read, in which he presents these counterexamples to the theory that knowledge is justified true belief. And they're fun little counterexamples, and once you get the hang of them, you can come up with them almost at will. It's easy to come up with them once you kind of figure out how they work. So we're out of time today. But what I want you guys to just make sure you feel comfortable with what it is to be a counterexample. Okay? So there's this theory that has been held that knowledge is justified true belief, that S knows that P, if and only if S believes that P is true, and S is justified in believing P. Okay? That's a theory. One thing, if and only if another. A counterexample is an attempt to show that one thing can be true even though the other is not. Right? So Gettier's counterexamples were attempts to show that someone could believe that P, it's true that P, and in fact, S is justified in believing that P, and yet they don't know that P. Right? So he uses the example of the man who's going to get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, and he comes up with a situation in which Jones believes that the man who's going to get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. It turns out that it's true that the man who's going to get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And he has good reason to believe. He has justification for thinking that the man who's going to get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And maybe the head of the company told him so. And yet he doesn't know it for this funny reason. So you should try to figure out how the examples work. and how they refute the theory. But we're going to have to skip over that. And largely because of this, people now accept that the justified true belief theory isn't quite right. And the question is, how do you fix it? And most people have thought you have to do something about the justification condition. You have to add to the justification. It's a certain kind of justification. There can't be anything false in the justification. But no consensus has emerged as to how to fix the justified true belief theory in response to Gettier, which is why he didn't do anything significant else in his career. But this one little paper he published has made him a household name amongst philosophers. So, kind of interesting. So, for next time, I didn't do the for next time slides. That's weird. Really? I thought I did.
No homework. Oh.
No, I'm sorry. There is homework. You're gonna read the first two meditations from Descartes' Meditations. It's in the book. It's the first reading in the epistemology section of the book. And then your journal entry should be on that. You know what? I'm not quite sure. I'll send out an email with this information so that you have it for sure, and I tell you what exactly to address in your journal entry. But if you guys want to talk a little bit about these Gettier counterexamples at the beginning of Wednesday's class, let's do that. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, cool. All right, guys.
Okay, bye.
See you next time. Where?